Good afternoon. How are you doing? Well, it's nice out here. I'd say 70 or so. It's been pleasant all day. It was cool last night, but not too cool, so that was nice as well. I've not heard anything so dramatic about Trump, so I try to keep him to a minimum. I think it's uncivil and unwise to be preoccupied with everything he may do, because I think it feeds his arrogance and self-centeredness. There's a man that I met years ago, Gene Cernan, C-E-R-N-A-N. Very impressive guy. He was a man who had walked on the moon. We don't have enough heroes today. I wrote about a son writing about a father who was a pilot, so space is in my mind. And it's a beautiful piece in the Washington Post, and I put the link on Twitter. But Gene Cernan was an astronaut, an engineer, test pilot, a lot of things. And so he was admirably qualified to be a person in space and on the moon. And I got to know a number of astronauts because of Edgar Mitchell in Florida when I had a case down there, and a local reporter said I had to meet him, and I did, and he was amazing. And so I ended up representing a number of astronauts, but Gene and I spent a little more time together. Now, how do you mark character in such a way that you say this person is special? Well, Gene had all these special abilities, as the astronauts did. But he told me a story of what he had done. And I think this is the mark of a hero. It goes like this. Among the things that they wanted him to fly were helicopters, which is not what he flew. But he saw this as the frame of reference for which he was a pilot. Think about that. And so he flew, if you will, helicopters, so that on the moon he could fly and navigate with the lunar module. Now, a thing that I guess pilots appreciate, but we civilians may not, is that when you fly over water in a jet, it appears very differently. But it's not like losing your orientation when you fly over water. But when you fly over water in a helicopter, there is a perception problem. And Gene tells the story that he was using up the fuel before he did maneuvers, so that he would not be carrying a lot of fuel if anything went wrong. Well, he flew too close to the water and then ended up in the drink in the helicopter. And there was a magnificent explosion and a huge surface fire. And he came out unscathed. And it does seem that those astronauts who survived those enduring tasks, they had a special ability to survive, to act under difficult situations. Now, they had reduced the number of flights to the moon, and so this looked like he would be scratched from being the commander of one of the visits to the moon. And they did all sorts of investigation, and they were prepared and did tell him that they could write up a report that basically cleared him of the condition that was brought on not by the pilot error, but by things relating to the machine. And as he told it was in a conversation with the head of NASA in a room in which they wanted to give this to him. He had spent a lot of time, energy, and guts wanting to go to the moon, and he had gone there once. but he wanted to go again, and it was going to be the last trip to the moon. They had reduced the number of visits. But he said to him, nope, I did it. I got it wrong. It's my fault. I don't want you to do anything special about this. The facts tell the story. So he did this knowing that it would mean he would not be on the moon mission. So, what's such a big deal about that? Well, a person who gives a sacrifice for something they care so intently about maybe recognizes they're imperfect, maybe thinks that truth is more important, values that we don't find in our society among our leaders these days. But this is a Disney ending because, well, of who he was and all he'd done and how truthful he was, he went on that trip to the moon. He was literally the last man to this date who has walked on the moon. I think that's the story of a hero. You know, when people say, oh, can you do this or that? Members of our society easily say, oh yeah, we sent a man to the moon. They have no idea what they're saying. I was a kid like many others in the Bronx in 1957 when overhead flew Sputnik. And until that time in grammar school, I thought it was a big kick to do magic tricks. And then when I saw this with my better eyes, this gleaming silver spheroid that I watched from a roof at 143rd and Willis Avenue, I thought, this is better than magic. This is the real thing. And that's how I got involved in my undergraduate degree in physics and engineering. But because I love politics, I took a shift to law school. Anyhow, these men all had stories to tell, and the women who've joined in the space race, if you will, they have it too. And there are others in our society who are our heroes, but we focus. We dig in and look at these criminals instead of realizing who is among us. True, 40% of our citizens apparently have no brains, have no ethics, have no courage, are not heroes, would compromise our nation and the well-being of all of us. But not Gene Cernan. And he campaigned to continue the space program. But in America, in which we have leaders that are terrified by algebra, they don't do anything. It's really pretty terrible. There are other stories, of course. Well, if you're traveling through the Northeast, they've worked out a way to patch up I-95. So it won't be as horrendous. Well, I'll believe that when I see it. If I have to go to the Northeast, I'm going to take different roads or train. I don't know about a plane. I haven't done anything like that. And with regard to our environment, another story that gets chilled by people who don't appreciate global warming or anything else. Local communities are resisting, solar, as well as wind power, geothermal, all of it. Why? Nobody's smart enough to understand it? No. And there's also pressure because if it's delayed by the people and it's a distributed source of energy, well, that kind of blocks out those fossil fools who were depriving us of a safe environment for so many years. Out here in Loudoun County, where I am, and this is particular to me as well, there's a woman on the school board. And when we had the pandemic, she didn't go in person to the school board meetings because of her personal immunosuppression concerns. And they ultimately decided that she had to come in person. And if she didn't, all she could do was audit what was going on. She couldn't vote or speak. And as a result of of this, there was a decision made by the forces that be that she should be able to attend. But then the school board itself, voted not. And so she's in a federal district court so she can fulfill her obligation to her elected position by attending the meeting remotely, which might endanger her, given her immunosuppression if she attended in person. And these meetings can be, pretty large affairs. So it's no small thing about her concern about going to a meeting like this in a county that has a fair number of conservatives that resisted having protections for the children in school. We don't want to protect our kids. Yeah, let them die young. Oh, that's not what we want. There's nothing to fear. Yes, well, a bunch of these kids did get infected. I have no idea what the health of them is, what happened to them. Now, for those of us that think this is the only planet we have, there are scientists who have discovered Saturn might be a good place to go. Now, that's like, 3 planets away. Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Neptune, Uranus, Pluto. So it's further away, so it's colder. It's further away from the sun. It doesn't have an atmosphere that we could walk around in. And the elements that we need to survive, that they find present on Saturn, are elements that are really below the surface, because part of the understanding is because there is an ocean underground the surface, and the surface is ice. I don't know. I won't be here when people start going to these places, but I sure wish I was, to observe how dumb we are to continue to compromise the planet we live on, to think we should go to another planet where we can't survive at all. Such is the ignorance, the idiocy, the tomfoolery, the crass conduct of so many people that compromise all of us. So, think of Gene Cernan when you're looking for comparables who are heroes. And the story that I mentioned earlier, that I posted on Twitter, is a story of a common man who was a pilot in World War II, and that he was gifted in his ability to fly, survive, and do his missions in Iwo Jima. And then he flew with commercial airlines, and he flew his son around in a small plane that he had. And by all accounts, by his son, he was a special person who's passed on to his final reward. So between the father pilot that his son has the ability to write about so that we feel about this person we never met, an individual hero not in the spotlight, and Gene Cernan, who was a hero, and he was in the spotlight, but we didn't appreciate, because we didn't really know that he had the character, the kind of character that you'd think a good Roman senator would have, or a good public servant that was idealized in Aristotle and Socrates as the kind of people that would run a good government. And I think Gene was that person, and there are others out there. We have to start celebrating the best among us instead of the worst, because that's just not what we should be doing. So here I am in my cathedral of trees, and if I can, I'll be out tomorrow to see you again.